Hi, everybody. I really want to say thank you for having me here today. I'm not a planner. So it has been a really fascinating day to hear how you all see the world. And I hope that what I'm bringing will help you see the broader world and how, for example, talking about how you bring in diverse communities or um, why you bring in community. Like, no, nobody's asking why, but um, how to engage other people and the importance of that. Um, I think I have a solution that has worked in Denver that I'm excited to talk to you about. Um, for this one, I mean, I've thought of so much about everything that you guys said today, and honestly, um, I don't feel like I have a right to even try to define place in a space like this. But I will say that for a lot of people that I've worked with, and then for myself, when I'm thinking about place, I'm thinking about home. And that's what place is for me. And I think for a lot of the folks who aren't planners and who don't think about, what a building looks like or how people interact or in it or whatever, they just think about it as this is my home. And so that's sort of the work that I do, and that's something that I want to share with you. I'm going to let some of the folks that we've worked with to you about their idea of place and home.
We are on the ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Lakota, and the Ute. And that's always been the case. There are over 20 tribes that can legitimately claim the Front Range as ancestral homelands.
You know, we're
with my folks. I was 10 months old, and they came over to the 1200 block in Utica Street. So you heard a little house on the prairie. Okay, that's how I lived. It was like a little house on the prairie. We had our chicken house. You figure from this to this, when streets was put in, see the street improvement? And you know, at that time, people were friendly. Your neighbor.
Better place than the north side. You know, one of the things that I love about that neighborhood, and I still do, we have Polish families, Italian families, Mexicanos, Chicanos. I mean, we were like a bouquet, un florero, de diferentes colores, idiomas, y podíamos caminar en la calle. No teníamos problemas. We didn't have no problems. We walked on the street, we knew each other, we knew everybody. It was a family neighborhood. And that's what I love.
So this was the site right here. We're on the corner, the south side of Colfax and the east side of Broadway. So this was quite a site for as some people said, the shot heard around the world, where 19 people immobilized 2 buses for 2 days.
Gang of 19 were the 19 people with disabilities that, came out of institutions. Some of them couldn't read or write. Some of them had never really had anything in their lives, but they laid down their bodies on the line for something that was bigger than themselves.
What I love about our movement in Colorado is once they took Colfax and Broadway, we've never stopped.
When you have a congregation that has that history of 150 years, and you could say, we are largely living our lives today the same way they lived their lives 150 years ago, even as it evolves and changes. There's a richness and an excitement and an inspiration to that. My name is Mark.
It's mainstay for African Americans because they couldn't move anywhere else. So redlining was a big part of the history.
They drew a boundary around the neighborhood that the banks wouldn't cross and other financial institutions wouldn't across so they wouldn't have to make any kind of investment. So if you were trying to buy a house, you couldn't get a loan from them, or there were issues with infrastructure.
The white people didn't allow you to go past Gaylord. You even if you had the money, you know, it was very difficult. It was just the way it was. It just seemed to be a known fact.
That was a big part of why you had such a rich black population in Five Points, and also the rich culture and heritage.
I always wondered, I was like, why doesn't Denver have a Chinatown like San Francisco or New York?
There was a Chinatown. It was bustling. There were businesses everywhere. Some of them were four-story buildings. There were herbs and teas. You could go to an acupuncturist. You know, they had all of these different things, and then it was gone.
These Chinese workers, they would be found working in laundries and in restaurants.
And we have an international directory published in China, and it would tell you that if you were in Denver, here's the places that you should go. They're safe.
They could go there and eat Chinese food, which is always a good idea.
Because they were forced to live in this small area, it was congested. And the city provided very few services.
To give you kind of perspective of what was going on is that in 1871, there was a Los Angeles Chinese massacre. Then they went to San Francisco. There was a riot in 1877. And then you come into Denver, and Denver was 1880. They burned down Chinatown.
True that Denver was as diverse as this. Oh, I'll go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. The point of that Hello.
This is where I explained to you that you're at a modern research university that truly understands both how to use technology and what to do when it goes wrong, but it does require patience.
No, it's on.
It's on.
Can you hear me without losing your ears? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So the point of all that is the collaborative process, right? Like that's what I really wanted to talk about today. And the idea of who is we, you know, in this idea of the process by which we can shape our public realm. You know, my question is, who are we talking about when we talk about we? And who gets to decide what is valuable, right? What's valuable to me isn't necessarily at all what's valuable to you. And certainly in the process of this project, I mean, I was born and raised in Denver, and I didn't know Denver had a Chinatown. And in fact, probably 9 times out of 10 in Denver, when we were talking about that movie, that was the most common question or the most common comment that we heard was that Denver had a Chinatown? Nobody knew. And it speaks to the idea of what we can unearth if we listen. All right.
It's going to go great.
This is fabulous.
Yeah, no.
All right. Thank you. So the challenges, you well know, is once we determine to make a place, we've almost inevitably determined to change that place. And so often in these days in Denver and in so many other cities, those changes may very well lead to the displacement of the people who have been calling that place home. But we just want to make it better, right? To shape it for maximum value. And like I said, who gets to decide what's valuable? Although we didn't always as a society, I mean, clearly today, and I'm so happy to see this, many people are now working and trying harder to include the people who live and work in these places in the conversation about, what's going to happen with these places. It's difficult though. How do you reach people who have by design been kept to the margins? Folks who haven't been offered a seat at the table and are so far removed that they have no idea what's being served there or when, and probably don't trust that whatever it is will serve them. This they've learned from most of our history. So we invite them to meetings, a few of them come. We send out surveys, we don't get a lot of responses. We flyer churches and schools, we translate them into another language. We tried, right? They just don't listen. So how do we get them to listen? I must have sat in 100 meetings revolving around that very question when I finally asked, what if we listened to them? And essentially the Office of Storytelling was born. So why storytelling? For the entire existence of mankind, story has provided humankind a formidable tool. Story helps us understand the world around us, how to stay safe, where to go, what to eat, what not to eat, what it means when the sky goes dark in the middle of the day. Story teaches us about how things work. It's a very common way of conveying information. It's how we learn about our ancestors and our government, about our friends and our neighbors. Stories help us imagine what might it be like to travel through space or time, to live in another country or on the other side of the tracks, in Gotham City or in Narnia. Stories help us define ourselves and others. They help us create social contracts that inform, for example, how we view migrants or teenagers or the American story. Stories can make us cry and laugh. They can help us heal. Stories help us make sense of things. They provide a framework for understanding our experiences. They help us see patterns, make connections, and draw conclusions. By sharing story, we uncover our own truth, and we allow others to relate to that truth, to walk in our shoes. Stories have the potential to build empathy and understanding. They also have tremendous capacity to entertain, which adds to their power. If a story makes us feel something, we are more likely to pay attention and remember. Stories have immense power. They are hardwired into our biology. That's all great. What does it have to do with placemaking? Remember, this was supposed to be a collaborative process and we needed to define the we, but we didn't know them or how they saw their places or what they valued, and they probably didn't know how to tell us, but they knew how to tell a story. Until two women came to the Denver Office of Storytelling to say they feared their story was being forgotten, and could we help them? I didn't know Denver ever had a Chinatown. I was born and raised there. Former location was about where the Colorado Rockies play baseball now. Somebody told me they were just there recently. It's a 5-minute drive from where I work. And until recently, there wasn't a marker in sight. The place nearly burned down by a anti-Chinese race riot in 1880 and then completely demolished by urban renewal in the mid-20th century, lives on in the memories, in the history of a whole Chinese community in Denver, which I honestly didn't know very much about. And while that all sounds pretty specific to an admittedly small percentage of today's Denverites, that film is a prime example of the power of storytelling for outreach and engagement, for education and empathy and DEI and so much more. Since its release in the fall of 2022, Reclaiming Denver's Chinatown has been screened and discussed 18 times across the state. And by discussed, I mean we've watched the film together with some 1,200 people in person across the state and talked about the issues brought up in the film, which include racism, redlining, access, plus, and this is vitally important, contributions from that community to the making, not only of our city, but, for example, of the Transcontinental Railroad, as well as the individual triumphs of these residents and their families, our neighbors, in overcoming and achieving terrific things in our society. The film sold out 2 film festival screenings, Some 15,000 viewers watched it on local broadcast stations. It was shown more than 50 times on the city's broadcast channel and had more than 7,000 viewers on the city's YouTube channel. The webpage with the story and stories about some of the individuals in the film was the most popular page on our website. The film is used in classrooms all over, including at Cal Berkeley, which I know because a professor from there called me to ask for permission. And you know what? All that reach and engagement is not even the best part. The best part is that we worked with Colorado Asian Pacific United, or CAPU, a coalition of Asian American Pacific Islanders and allies who work to celebrate and strengthen the community in making that film. In partnership, we captured our collective history and stories of the Chinese community that they are now using as a tool to further their work on behalf of the community. Just this month, History Colorado, for the very first time, opened an exhibit about Denver's Chinatown. For the very first time in a century and a half, they acknowledged and celebrated Denver's Chinese community. And our friends, our partners at CAPU, insisted that clips from the film be included in the exhibit, and on opening night credited the Denver Office of Storytelling and our work with helping them to finally find their place in the city's official history. You want to talk about collaboration and placemaking, right? There are lots of other examples, but I want to share a project specific to planning. From 2021 to 2022, approximately, the Denver Office of Storytelling partnered with Denver Landmark Preservation on the first ethnicity-based historic context. Why ethnicity-based? Because the city realized that only maybe 13% of its landmarks recognize the diversity in a city that is more than 40% non-white. Over the course of a year or so, Landmark wrote a 200-page historic context that scratched the surface of the city's Latino, Chicano, Mexicano history. Remember, Santa Fe is older than Plymouth Rock. So the history is long and the legacy is strong. And the Office of Storytelling created a companion film. Because of the film, instead of a press conference and a release that would have been shared on social media and maybe earned a headline, we instead were able to invite community, media included, to the movies for a celebration. We served tamales from one of the historic restaurants included in the context. We set up tables where partners could share information about their role in the context and beyond. In the theater, CPD presented a summary of the context. City council members talked about their participation. I shared about storytelling and introduced the film, which appeared on a big screen for audience members to enjoy from the comfort of their theater seating, some chips and salsa or some popcorn, or maybe they bought a glass of wine. More than 100 people attended a 2+ hour celebration, and more than 60,000 people have since seen that film. Never before have community voices played such an active and prominent role in preservation planning. Landmark says the film, Que Viva la Raza, honoring a Denver legacy, brought the project to life and was essential to getting the series off to a successful start. But what I'm most excited about, again, is where that work led. For the past 2 years, Landmark has been working on the second Denver in context, this time with the Native American community. And you want to talk about complicated. Landmark recently hosted a tribal gathering with some 48 or so of the tribal nations that have a connection to Denver and Colorado. It was the second such convening, and honestly, the first one didn't go so well. Another department had asked to speak and brought up a topic that was far more sensitive than they all realized. The gathering ended on a pretty sour note. But Landmark listened to the people they had been building relationships with. They heard the stories about the pain and the reason behind it. Then they continued to show up in community, to go to them, to hear their stories and collect their oral histories. They brought all of those lessons learned, all those relationships built into the convening earlier this month. It was a weekend long. It was complicated and expensive and hard, but a tremendous success. People from around the region showed up. supported by locals who, through this process, had become partners and allies. The woman who leads the project was exhausted but beaming toward the end. She thanked me for bringing storytelling, listening into their work. This context has been and will be, in its final form, a true collaboration with the American Indian community. It's a game changer, meaningful and important work, proof of how transformative listening and storytelling can be. In 5 years, the world's only storytelling, cultural preservation, and narrative change project, Denver Office of Storytelling created 9 documentary films and about 100 short films, made about 4 million impressions on social media, and hosted more than 70 community events in which story opened into conversation about our collective history, challenges, and triumphs. The team brought resident voices and histories out of the shadows and onto big and little screens for more than 500,000 people. The work was selected for 5 film festivals, nominated for 6 Heartland Emmy Awards, and honored with some 27 different awards, including History Colorado's Josephine H. Miles Award for a major contribution to state history. Despite all that, the city has determined of late to shutter the Office of Storytelling. And both Landmark Preservation and COPU, you remember them from reclaiming Denver's Chinatown, been among the groups lobbying against the decision. COPU's executive director wrote, "I want to underscore that the video documentaries were absolutely direct, sustained, and authentic community engagement. It is likely that the folks that worked on these documentaries have built stronger relationships with our communities than many other city initiatives." But the truth is, like so many cities, Denver tends to be slow to recognize and value the same things our communities do. Some of the most wonderful things the city has to offer, which brings me to an important point. If our true intention is collaboration, if we hope to shape our public spaces to maximize their value in a way that doesn't harm the communities that have been traditionally harmed in those processes, we have to be prepared to listen and learn, to be willing to see our communities as part of us, not as them, to be prepared to allow the narrative, the stories, to drive the change, and that change is surely larger than we are used to. One of our greatest challenges in making the films was finding historic images to include to illustrate the history we referenced. We partnered with all the big historic archives in the city, the keepers of our city's history, and the truth is our communities are either missing or poorly represented. Again, we had to rely on our residents to open their personal archives, to share their artifacts along with their stories, to fill in the gaps in our collective history, and change the city's accounting of itself to reflect the truth. Denver has been a diverse city, home to Native Americans, Latinos, Blacks, drag queens, Jews, Chinese, Japanese, people with disabilities, etc., since the very beginning. But the last thing I want to say is that our communities are the keepers of our history. We have to acknowledge that. And we have to understand what is important to those communities, what they value in order to co-create their public realms and to write a new story. And the last thing I want to say is just, I'm so happy to follow the co-creation because I feel like that's exactly the kind of work that we do at the Office of Storytelling. And I, hope that you can incorporate the idea of storytelling into your community engagement and very important work. Thank you.